Hello and welcome to the third part of the ARCHLine.XP online architectural courses. My name is Untitled. I'll be your guide to show you the documentational tools of ARCHLine.XP, the design software. I'm the partner manager for ARCHLine. I also conduct online trainings, and also I'm a CAD and modeling enthusiast. So I'm not only going to show you how to create something like this, but I will also show you the tips and tricks I picked up along the way during these years working with ARCHLine. Last time we looked at a building which just got its roof, so that's the building that we are working on, and I showed you how to create a very simple roof structure with gutters and solar panels and other elements. And before we proceed and before we talk about what we have today, namely sections, elevations, geolocation and other annotations and text, let's look at the questions that I received after yesterday's session. I always urge you to ask your questions because they are making the show much more relevant. So if you have any questions regarding what you are seeing right now, please ask the questions in the chat bar, which is either next to or below this video, and then once the questions are asked at the end, I'm going to talk about them. But now let's look at the question what I just received after yesterday's session. And the question was about what happens if the roof has an insulation member. And that's something what I haven't mentioned because the roof that we were working on is a very conceptual one. So it doesn't really have that many structural elements. So I'm just going to show you how this roof looks like. So there's not much going on here, but I mentioned before that the roof could have purlins and rafters and all kinds of things, and one thing I haven't touched upon is the layer system. Now, just like the walls and slabs, the roof can have multiple layers. So if you have one layer which is the covering itself, which is tiling, a very simplified one, and the pine-made structure itself, but if you want to have an extra or several additional layers which would have, let's say, an insulation property of 10 millimeters, then you would have an extra layer like that, and you can change the hatch pattern, you can change the material, and that way you can define how this insulation membrane should look like. Another question about this was if you can use manufactural elements for this. Well, for this, the best you can do is that you can download the texture from the manufacturer's website, and then the hatch pattern and the texture would look the way it should. So that's just something I wanted to add as a side note for yesterday's show. And now today we are going to look at the documentation part, and basically what we are trying to do, we are done with the modeling. So now we are going to get some data out of it because that's what we are going to be paid for, right? So there are two things what we want to achieve with all this work. One is a stunning visual, which we can do at the end, and the other thing we want to achieve is some kind of documentation, a plot layout, and that's what we are working towards today. And be sure to stick around till the end because I have a very tiny surprise for you. Just I did yesterday with the speed build video of the electric guitar. I have something similar prepared for today. So let's jump right in. And the first thing we are going to cover today is actually creating sections. Now let's investigate what sections really are. They are just going to be a cut of the model that we have created. So that's what we are going to do today. But the thing is that we are not looking to create a line drawing. We are going to get something more out of it. Let me show you what I mean. So let me highlight the floor plan and jump to the first floor, the ground floor, which I can do with the page up and down key. So I'm just going to go all the way to the bottom. And here, using the documentation section tool, I'm just going to record the plane along which the model is going to be cut. So that's what I'm doing now, define section. Before I create the section itself, there's a couple of settings I have to get right. For instance, do I need the arrows at the end of the section line? Yes, I think I do. And let's go down, and do I need hatches on section? Yes, I do. And what about the objects? Now, the objects are things which can be furniture pieces, in our case, the solar panels. We don't need them on the section. Why don't we need them? Because generating them all the time would take more time, and we don't really need that. Another thing I have to check is that I want to have a partial section. Now, why do we need a partial section? It's because if the building is larger than this, or it has an environment, as we are going to see later on it will have, then these elements will be generated too, and we don't need that. So partial section should be enabled. This is fine. Okay, hit OK. Next task, we have to record the section plane. So I'm just going to do it like this. So I'm just going to make one line. If there are too many points on your floor plan, sometimes the cursor is snapped to it. So how do I keep it orthogonal? I showed you in the first lesson. You just have to use the shift key and record the section like that. I think this is good now. And we are going to look at the section from this direction. And if I do that, create update section view, yes, we want to have that, and we see a very nice detailed section with hatch patterns. Here's one problem. The drawing is getting pretty crowded, so I have one viewport here, a 2D there, 3D there. How do I organize these things? I can do that with this icon up here, and if I do that, it's always the viewport in focus which is going to be magnified. So if I'm going to go back to the 2D and I click on this button, it jumps back to the focus. So let's go back to the section. There's something which I'm not really satisfied with, and namely that is the hatch pattern of this element. But what happens if I hover my mouse over this element? I see that I'm not selecting individual lines. Instead, I'm selecting the original model. So if I click on this section, you see that here the slab is selected, but so is on the 3D, which means that these are not only drawing elements, or these are not drawing elements, these are actually the original parts of my model. For instance, if I, let me just go here to see the windows over here. If I select the window, I see that the window is highlighted. So this is not a line drawing, meaning that if I make any kind of change on this drawing, which I'm going to do later on, then the drawing and this is going to be updated as well. Let me just very quickly do something here. Let me just decrease the height of this window from 2100 millimeters to 1500. So you see, changes are updated right away. Now I'm going to undo this because this doesn't look good at all. Now, so we already learned that this is not a line drawing, this is a linked drawing with your model, right? So next thing I want to do, I'm going to change the hatch pattern for this slab because I don't like this. I need to have a reinforced concrete hatch pattern. Now, some of you might say that this is way too simplified, so there are no layers over here. That's right, that's true. At this point, this is a conceptual drawing. We don't need layers at the moment. Later on, we might add them. So let's just highlight the slab and go to the properties. And go to the slab layers, and there you can access the layer of the material of this particular slab layer. So I'm just going to hit the material as well and click on the cogwheel, which if I click on edit material, I get to the tab where I can set up the properties of this material. Now, among others, I can fine tune the size of this material, so based on which it's going to be repeated along a line, and also the appearance. If I want to create a render, then this is how I can set up the appearance of the material. But one thing what I need to check is the hatch on section, because that determines how the material should look like here. So if I go to hatch on section, I see that currently I have a hatch pattern which is hatch 67. That doesn't say anything to me, so I just need something a bit more proper. So I'm just going to go to the preferred hatch patterns, and I'm looking for the reinforced concrete ISO. I think this is much better to my purposes. Hit OK. Well, the hatch spacing and dash length, I think I have to increase to 300 at least, the spacing I need to. There you go. I don't have to add in the millimeter signifier because now I'm working in millimeters, so I don't need to do that. Hit OK, hit OK again, and OK. Nothing has changed. Why is that? That is because the sections need to be refreshed. And how do we do that? There are two ways actually. Either you click on the header and click refresh, or you can click on the section line, and there you can do that. And there's a third way. You can click on the 3D hammer, and that would update the hatches, the sections as well. So if I update the section, I see a very nice proper hatch pattern over here. So that's actually what I was looking for. And that is way better to what I was imagining. One thing I haven't showed you is these annotation lines. These are generated when you make a section. So if you go back to the section properties, then here you can define if you want to have the elevation signifiers. You can turn it on and off. I'm just going to keep it on. And here you can define that. Level annotation lines are visible. I'm just going to keep them on for now. Okay, so that was a section. Now the next task, I have to create an elevation. How are they different, if they are different at all? Well, there's one way they could be different. Actually, one thing I haven't done, and that is very important. Let me just turn back to sections for a second. What happens if you have a broken section line? Because that might happen. That might happen that you have a section line like this. So how do I do that? I click on the section line, and click insert node, which is, it's like adding an extra pin along which this line would be movable like that. So I just move the section line, hit enter. The software asks me, do you want to create or update the section line? At this point it's actually updates, so I'm just going to hit OK, and here's what happened. I see that my staircase is now part of my section, which means that every time you move this line, the section is going to be updated. Okay, so let's now return to elevation. That was just a side note I wanted to add to make sure that you get the whole story. Now, with the elevations, there's one one difference. Mainly is that the creation of the elevation can be done from here, from the project navigator. Okay, for some of you who are working on a smaller screen, you might not see this project navigator right away. Maybe it's unpinned. So if you work like this and it's not there, just hover your mouse over it and it appears, and just click on this pin in the top right just below my image, and then you can pin the project navigator. That was another trick I learned along the way. So now, how do we create an elevation, let's say from here? All I have to do, I have to go to the project navigator and click on the elevation I want to create. West elevation would be fine for me. The software asks me, do you want to do this? Yes, we want to do this. So now we ended up with an elevation drawing. Again, we learned before, if I click on this button, the elevation is going to be nicely organized. And again, every single element are linked to the drawings. So these are actually objects, not only line drawings. Later on, we are going to create a line drawing as well. At this point, that's not really needed. So the elevation is done, but it's not textured at all. So how do we create hatches on elevation? That is actually a representation switch, which is down here at the Navibar. If you click on this element up here, then you can define how your elevation looks like. Okay, let's create a shadowed or textured elevation. First of all, I need to have a shadow with contour lines and hatches. That one's good, but on all the surfaces, not only on the selected ones. I want to have a shaded elevation with textures, and I want to need an elevation shadow. Some of you might ask, how do we get the shadows if we haven't even set up the project location, north direction, etc.? These are not actual shadows. These are standard 45-degree angled dashed lines, which are signifying shadows. These are just representations, but that's not the accurate shadows yet. So I'm just going to hit OK. And if I do that, the software calculates for just a second to sort of draw out the lines, and I see a nice shaded, textured, and hatched elevation. Next logical question is, where are actually these hatches coming from? Because so far we set up how the materials should look like on a section, but how does that translate to an elevation? Let me show you how. For instance, let's select this door, go to its properties, and I have to pull up its material setting, which is this food paldo. And here, if I go to the cogwheel, I see that with the edit material, I have several tabs I have checked before. And if I go to hatch in 3D, I can set up how the hatch pattern looks like on the elevation. So two major things you have to keep in mind. Hatch in 3D would govern how the material looks like on a three-dimensional elevation. Hatch on section governs how the material should look like on a section. That's all you need to know at this point with this. Let me just select that. Okay, next task is how do we set up the geolocation, because we want to create, it looks like that I accidentally deleted the hatch pattern, but that's fine if I go and refresh this, that it goes back. So if you ever get into a situation when something just changed on your section or elevation, be sure to update it. Okay, so now let's talk about shadows, and let's talk about how these shadows are created. Well, they are created based on geolocation. Now, geolocation has a set of properties you can set up. Namely, we are going to set up the location of the project, north direction, and the time and date during which the shadows are going to be calculated. But without explaining it, let me just show you. Let me go to the 3D. I have one problem here. If I'm going to get shadows, well, there's not going to be anything to cast a shadow on, because there's no space around it. We're just floating around in emptiness. So first of all, I have to create some kind of environment around this building. Let me just highlight the drawing and turn back on the visibility of the location plan, which is this Elata Nova Start -2D. Just turn it on. And here I have the whole location plan. And what I have to do, I don't have to be too fancy here. I just need to have a plane on which I can put my building. And for this, the slab tool is just perfect. So I'm just going to make a rectangle, let's say like this big. There you go. Now this is not good. This has a parquet texture. That's not good because this is outside and this is conceptual. So I'm just going to change this to bright white. Well, the side material as well. And the base offset from the floor should be -300 millimeters. And there you go. Now I have a plain white, well, plane on which I can put my building. Now, the next task is, even though this building is going to have some shadows, there's not going to be neighboring buildings to cast shadows onto mine. So I have these nice lines and hatch patterns. These are signifying neighboring buildings, and I want to create these buildings somehow, so that way I can show the building in sort of its actual environment. For that, we have the building terrain and building volume tool. What it does is that, as you can see on the illustration, which is actually taken from this very project, is that you can create large slabs of buildings. Now, obviously, you could be using walls and slabs and also roofs to create additional buildings, but like I mentioned in the beginning, modeling is all about speed and efficiency. You don't have to spend too much time on things that you don't really need. So at this point, we just need to have something which looks like the real thing, but it doesn't act like it. You are going to get it in a second what I meant just with that. So let me just trace this line over here, hit enter, and now I have this large block of buildings. So what's the deal with that? First of all, I can define the total height of this creation. This is going to be 9,000 millimeters, and I have to define the frontal facade and the roof pitch. Well, the front is going to be 6,000 millimeters and the inclination should be 45 millimeters. And I'm going to accept that for all sides, and there you go. So I have now a building, sort of, but that's not really looking any good because it has this kind of wooden texture and I don't need that. So I'm just going to go to its properties, and with the materials I change it to bright white. There you go. There's another one next to it. So how do I copy this to there? I just select the building, right click, create similar, and I can just sketch the layout just like that. And there you go. If I go back to the 3D, and maybe I'm going to jump into Axonometry just for a second, and that way I can show you how my neighboring buildings look like. So let me just have another one, or maybe two, so that way it will be way more interesting. So I'm just going to again right click, create similar, and I'm just going to draw it like this. So that way, but the only reason I'm doing this is because I want to create shadows on this drawing. So, you know, without having any neighboring buildings, there are not going to be any shadows. So now let's jump onto the topic of defining the geolocation itself. You can do that by jumping in here and go to solar access. I'm sorry, that's not the one. I have to define the north direction, sun position. Here we go. So if I go to the location and sun settings, I have a jump list of cities I can choose to define where my project actually is. And if I do that, then the longitude and latitude is automatically calculated, so that way your shadows are going to be accurate. And also I can define the north direction, which I know is well, it has a 42 degrees angle. So that way you see that the north direction marker has already turned. Now I haven't set up the proper city. I selected something, but that's not what I want. I want to have an exact location. I know exactly where this building is going to be, and that is going to be in the United States. So I'm just going to go to File, BIM, Project Parameters, and click on the project location. If I do that, I have this jump list. How do I want to select the location? I can either do it via Google Maps, City List, or another property. I'm just going to go with Google Maps. And I'm just going to use an empty vacant lot, which is in Carmel Avenue in El Cerrito, which is in California. Here we go. So this is where I'm going to put our building, and that is going to be on this vacant lot. If I go to this means satellite, but my Windows is in Hungarian, so that's the reason why it's not good. So this is a perfectly good vacant lot. So I'm just going to position my building over there. And again, this you could do here as well. So it's either or. You can either do it via File, BIM, Project Parameters, or Google Maps, Project Location. We seem to be all set, so we are going to make a shadow analysis or show the shadows. For that, I'm going to go back to the perspective view. Let me just elevate it. By the way, if you want to elevate your viewpoint, you just hold the scroll and just push it downwards, and that way you can go up a bit. Let me zoom out and turn a little bit with the right click. I'm just right clicking and move the mouse. Okay, perfect. So now I'm going to turn on the shadows, and I do that with view, shadows, and shadow animation. I'm sorry, that should be, let me just find it. Yeah, shadow simulation. It's not, it's simulation actually. So if I do that, the software tells me that based on my current settings, during this time and this day, this is how the shadows should look like on that particular place, which I signified on Google Maps. So I'm just going to fine-tune the sliders, and then that way I can see the shadows which are being cast on my drawing and the shadows that my building is casting on the neighbors. Let me just modify the date as well. It's a very good way of representing how these things should look like. Okay, we accept that. By the way, if you want to turn on and off the shadows, you can do it here. So just click on shadows on, or switch off shadows and lights as well. Normally you would not need the shadows all the time, you just need it every now or then, and this is how you can jump to it. Okay, now we are done with the shadows, but we don't want these buildings and slab anymore, because we are going to turn towards dimensioning, and for that we don't need these things. But I don't want to delete them, I just want to hide them. There are several ways, but the best and more efficient is to use layers for that. So let me just go to the layer manager, go to all layers, and create a new layer, which is going to be named surroundings, I think would be the proper one. Maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong with my grammar, but this is going to be fine. So I created an additional layer over here, and now all I have to do, I select the elements I do not need. I just control click on the elements, the slab and the 3 neighboring buildings, and I go to the layer manager over here, and I'm just going to find the surroundings. If I start typing in as, then I should be able to find it, surroundings. There you go. Okay, so now these elements are on a surrounding layer, and then I can turn off the surrounding layer using the layer walk, and I think it's better if I do it in the, well, I can do it here as well. So I just go to the layer walk and turn off the surroundings, and there you go. So that's how you can turn on and off certain things at will. If you don't need them, just hide them. If you need them, pull them back on. I'm just going to make them disappear. And I think that that for now I'm going to hide the 2-dimensional floor plan as well, but there's just one thing I want to make clear. In ARCHLine there are 2 definitions of north. One is the true north, which is up here. So that is how north actually looks like in relation to the floor plan. But there's an additional switch in which you can have something like a temporary or project north. So you can rotate the whole drawing and create a new north direction without changing or messing with the original setting. Let me show you what I mean by that. Let's assume that for whatever reason you want to have this line to be horizontal, because that's way better for drafting. So what you do, you go to rotate and rotate the whole drawing. So I just click on one point and click on the other point which I want to make horizontal, and if I do that, the whole drawing is going to move. Notice how my north direction hasn't changed at all. So this has nothing to do with the shadows, the geolocation, or anything. This is just a temporary switch, so that way I can easily draw additional things in an orthogonal mode. How do I go back? I go to rotate and I go to swap, and that way I can swap back and forth between the 2 representations. In fact, swap is used so frequently that it makes sense to make it into a shortcut, and that is another trick I'm showing you right now, because I think there's no excuse to not using shortcuts at this point, because you're going to use them very frequently. So let's just go to rotate and right click on the swap icon and say I want to make it into a keyboard shortcut, and then I would see a virtual keyboard in which I can see all the currently set up shortcuts. Let's say that the rotate should be Ctrl-Shift-R. Let's see if this combination is already taken. Ctrl-Shift. Well, this is not taken at all. So I'm just going to do that. So I'm just going to go to here, which selects the lastly selected tool, which is under the ribbon bar view, rotate, swap. Click in here, and say that I want to put this into Ctrl-Shift-R, hit OK. Let's see what happens if I use this hotkey. Ctrl-Shift-R toggles the floor plan back and forth. So that way you can have multiple views of the same floor plan actually. And if you want to make it more convenient to work on, then that's how you can do that. So very important distinction. Project North is, well, it can be arbitrary, and True North is the one which actually influences your geolocation and shadows. Now, once we have turned off these layers, which I'm going to do now, so I don't need the surroundings anymore and these drawings. I'm just going to go to the layer manager, right click, off, and I don't need this. And now comes the more exciting topic. By the way, before I do that, this marker I haven't touched upon. This is actually the elevation marker. So the section marker was here, elevation marker was there. It's very handy that you can actually move it. Or you can trim it back and forth. So if you want to have additional points in that, or you want to include additional buildings, this is what happens. If I update my elevation, then I see that additional buildings appear. Why is that? That's because I haven't defined that this should be a partial elevation. Because if you don't define that, then every other element which is on your model would be added. And we don't want that. So we just want to have the building and nothing else. So partial elevation and partial sections are the way to go if you only want to include what's in here. Okay, going back to the drawing, now we start to deal with the actual numbers, because we are going to do dimensioning. Now, dimensioning works differently in every single country I've heard of, basically. So I'm going to use one way of measuring and dimensioning. But if your style is a bit different, I'm pretty sure that you can replicate that as well. But ask your questions in the comment if something is not clear about this. So going to dimensioning, there's a special scenario. We are going to dimension all the walls and all the openings. For the openings, I have to make a quick detour because we want to set up the proper opening dimensioning. And I can do that by clicking on the door, going to its menu, and go to Dimension Consignment. And if I want to, I clicked here and this is what came up. If I want to define that this is actually how I want to dimension my doors, then I have to enable that. That's just a very quick detour. This is how you can set up how your door and window consignation should look like. So just let me hit OK. Nothing happened yet. This is going to take place later. How do I place dimensions? I go to the Dimension tab, Building, All Walls. Now if I do that, the software tells me that these are the things I can measure, and these are the criteria I have already set up. So from this jump list, I can add things I want to measure. I'm pretty satisfied with this list. So door, window frame, wall endpoints, internal rooms, wall thicknesses, overall external building dimension. I think this is pretty good. So let me just hit OK. Here's what happens. I have to highlight my whole drawing like that, hit Enter. And now the software tells me where do you want to put the dimensions to. Let me just do it like this. And now the dimensions appear. Actually, my elevation marker is in the way, so let me just offset it back just a second. So that way I can, yeah. You might not want to update the elevation all the time, but I think it now makes sense that I do. Okay, so now the dimensions are created, and so are the window and door dimensions based on the value that I have set up. It's very important that these dimensions are, just like the sections and elevations are connecting with the model and the floor plan, so are these dimensions. What do I mean by that? Let's say that this window is 90 centimeters or less than a meter away from this corner. If I jump to this window and click on this marker and move the window to somewhere else, because let's say that the client said that he wants this window to be moved a tad bit, so let me just move it to 400 millimeters from the corner. If I do that, the dimensions appear as well. So they are going to track the changes. Let me just undo and redo so that way you can see it. So that way. Now another thing important about the dimensions is I mentioned in the beginning that I'm using my own dimension style, but if you have another way of doing, maybe you don't have the architectural dashes or you have an arrow or whatever else, then you just go to Properties, and here you can fine-tune how your dimensions look like down to the rounding, the decimals, the end, and also if you're working in imperial feet and inches, then that's how you can set that up. So again, you can save that into another style. I'm not going to do that because I'm satisfied with what I have over here, but just in case you were ever wondering, that's how you can set that up. Okay, dimensions are done. I'm doing pretty good with this. So next thing we have to do, we have to create the area calculations, the rooms and areas. Now, how do I do that? We have a purpose-built tool for that, and that's called room and area. And just like with the slab or the roof tool, this is able to recognize the walls and the contours. Now, if I click on room by walls, the software tells me that now you should click on the location that you want to actually measure. And here at the left hand side, I have different styles predefined. Now, this means all kinds of different things. By defining the rule or the role of this location, certain properties will be added. I know for a fact that this one is a bedroom, so I'm just going to go with bedroom, click in the location. By the way, if you're not satisfied with where the text is, just click again and it's going to be moved. This one is going to be an office or a study. That one's good. And that one's a toilet over here. Just click again. I think it's better now. Before I tell you more about what these numbers, where these numbers are coming from, let's investigate a difficult scenario. I have one single location here, but this location has multiple purposes. It's half a kitchen, half a living room. So if I create it now as one large kitchen, then how do I break it up to smaller pieces? Well, in that case, I shouldn't use this tool. I should use something else, which is room by polygon. And if I do that, first I define the role of this location, and then I can just sketch the polygon, any kind of polygon, by the way. And that way I can define how large this location actually is. Now, I want this line to go into this distance. How do I do that? I'm just going to hover my mouse to this edge. The green helping lines appear, and I'm just going to snap. You have to zoom in because this drawing is getting pretty dense. So I'm just going to click over there, hit enter. Now the software tells me, are there any areas that you want to cut out from this room? Maybe you have a kitchen island or anything, but I don't have that, so I'm just going to hit enter again. Height of the slab or wall, this you can define. I'm just going to use it as it is, and now I have one room over here. This is not a room, this should be a kitchen. How do I set it up? I go to the room name and I retype kitchen. Okay, next task, I'm going to have a living room over here, so I'm just going to use this very same thing. I'm just going to click and trace my my building just like that. So this is the more manual type of work. So like I mentioned in the first part, if you have any favorite music, that's the time to put it on. Maybe something instrumental, so it not takes my mind away from it. If you have any favorite artist and you can recommend it to me, then please do that. So enter. Again, if you want to cut anything out, you do. Another enter. And you have another room over there. There are two problems. One is the color is the same. I don't like that. The other one is the name. I have to change that to living room. Yeah, and the color should be bluish, maybe. Let's do it like this. Yeah, there you go. So now you have the rooms and areas. Let's investigate their properties a little bit further. Let's go here and go to the properties. I see the norms and rules based on which we are working. So we are using the latest norms in architectural regulations. So this is where you can set up which norm to use. And the upper limit comes in handy if you're working in a loft floor. You can define what's the total limit of the headroom and how the areas are going to be calculated once those rules are met. Calculated values, this is where you can set up additional properties to your stamp. Maybe if you want to add the covering type, then that's where you can do that. Floor finish, for instance, could be let's say it could be parquet, and there you go. You can add up this additional things to it, so you can fine-tune how your room and area marker should look like. I'm not going to define this any further, but you get the idea in terms of how to do that. Okay, dimensions are done, sections are good, elevations are perfect, rooms and areas are worked out. Only on the ground floor. I haven't done anything on the first floor, but you get the idea. Next thing, I have to add annotations and other symbols. Now these symbols could be anything. These symbols could be elevation markers, north signs, entry signs, anything like that, but you need to know how to add them as well, because they are going to be a bit different than what I have showed so far. So let's first start with the elevation on the floor plan. So let me just go to dimension, and elevation floor plan is basically a marker which is going to show the elevation of a certain element. First I have to select what I want to measure or dimension. This is going to be this wall, and then I have to pick a place where this marker is going to be referring to. Here you go. And then I have to decide if I want to dimension the top or the bottom of this structure, this wall. It's going to be the bottom. And lastly, I have to add the value, which is going to be 0 millimeters. That's going to be my ground zero, right? So I'm just going to hit OK. Now I could replace this symbol with something else from my library, but I'm satisfied with what we have. This is just this 6.78. That's just illustration. That's not the actual value. That just shows you that the number is going to be there. So let me just hit OK, and then I can put down my marker like that. So this is, what is it? What is this actually? This is something that we call a group. A group is actually a bunch of lines and hatch patterns. Later on, I'm going to show you how to create one. We are done with this. Next thing, we have to create a north symbol. And I do that by going to the Design Center, Group, and Signs. And here we have arrows. Sorry, I'm looking for a north sign. The arrows are going to come a little bit later. So North English. And let me just find something. Here you go. This is a good one. So I'm positioning the north sign, and see what happens. The north sign is automatically rotated based on the value I have set up before. So if the north is already turned or relocated or rotated, then your north sign is going to pick up that location as well. Okay, why is my group green? It's because that's the way it was created. And why is it this big? It's because it could be customized. So if it could be customized to any kind of other shape. But let's return to the matter of why is it green while everything else should be black, right? So my line weight is line color is black. How come this thing is not black? It's because the group is trying to retain its original properties, in which case the green color of these lines. So if I want to force that this should be black, then I'm just going to click on force color, and then the marker is going to be black or blackish. So that's the way you do it. Now another way to use groups is to add a entry symbol over here. And I'm just going to go back to groups and signs and arrows. And I'm just going to use this arrow over here. And if I'm positioning it, I can use the F5 key to toggle which point I want to hold on to. I'm just going to put this here. And there you go, you have a marker over there. Now, what happens with before I actually tell you about text, I think we have to talk about how to create a group, because that's something what might come up later on. So let me just go to the drafting tools and show you how to create a similar group to this one. So what you have to do, you have to first of all define the group that you want to work with. So you have to actually draw the element. This is going to be a very simple. Sorry, I was too fast with this. So that's going to be a very simple triangle. Triangle is the word I'm looking for. So I create this, and then I go to the drafting, and I want to create a new group. Now, when you want to, let me just zoom out so you can see it. When you want to create a group, you have two choices. Do you want to create a group which is going to be used in this project, or do you want to create a group which is going to be part of your library? What is the difference? If you create a local group, then you're just going to create something which is going to be a bunch of lines. So it's not going to behave as a basically bunch of lines. Instead, it's going to behave like one single entity. But if you want to create a group in your library, then you go to group in library, select your whole drawing, hit enter, pick on the reference points based on which it's going to be inserted to your drawing, hit enter, and then you can name your drawing. So this is going to be webinar entrance sign. The category should be, well, the my category would be just fine. Subcategory would be good, and here you go. So if I go back to the main search area, and go look for my element, then here we go. So that's how you can create an additional group. I just wanted to touch upon this real quick because you are going to spend a lot of time working with groups. One good scenario of working groups is when you have furniture pieces. You might not want to have the full 3D model of maybe the stairs or the desk or the chairs. You are just going to be satisfied with the groups themselves. Now let's talk about text. Text is just the same as any other 2D element with one major addition. You can type in the value you want. Maybe this is going to be a ground floor plan. So let me just hit OK. And then you can position your text like that. Here's the trick though. If I zoom out, I see that my text might not be in the right scale. You could go back to the project properties and change the scale, or if this is just an individual switch, one by one, then you're just going to click on the marker and crank up the size of your text, just like that. Similarly, if you have another text, let's say I want to signify the entrance, once again, I'm just going to make one marker over here. I want to make sure that this text is referring to the original item. I just click on the text, go to the context menu, add pointer line, and select the element I want to refer to. And one great thing about this is that if I move the text, which I'm doing right now, that the pointer line is going to comply with the changes, so that way you can add very simple annotations and even revision clouds to your drawing. And that is actually what concludes our dimensioning, elevation, section and elevation course. And next time we are going to look at how to create the printouts. So we are going to compile all this together, and we are going to make a plot layout. And we are also going to talk about how to do detailing on unlinked drawings, how to create additional line drawing elements, and how to compile all together into a print queue. And we are working our way towards a very complex documentation. And let's now look at the questions that I have on the screen, because there's quite a few. So I responded to the first question about the roofs. And let me just review what we have here. When setting the dimension parameters, can we have an interactive graphic visual of the dimension style, arrowheads, extension lines, size of dimensions? All these properties you have mentioned can be set up in here. I'm sorry, that's not what I wanted. I wanted to set up the properties. So in here, and when you set up, for instance, the architectural tick at the end, then you see exactly how it's going to look out, and you have this kind of representations to show you how the dimensions would look like. Yes, I see that somebody is recommending music over here. I'm going to definitely check that out. Another question, is it possible to make your own line types? If yes, how? Now, that's an excellent question, and we actually had a webinar on this one. So I'm just wondering which would be the best way to go. If you go to drafting, create pattern, then you can create your additional customized line type. Now, it's been a while since I used this tool, so I'm not going to do it now because I have to refresh my memory on this one, because I usually use our factory built-in. But once again, if you want to create your own, then you go to drafting, create pattern, create line type, and here you can create something customized. And that way you can end up with even line types which have symbols or text in it. If you actually go up to the website ARCHLine.XP.com, then you can see, I think, a representation there during one of our webinars. So that is actually what we had to cover. And another question, what are the information extracted in section and elevations which complies to BIM LOD information? Well, it really depends on which level of LOD are we talking about. During next time, we are going to make an elevation measurements and dimensions, and we are going to do much more with elevations, so probably that would answer some of the questions. And that is actually wrapping up today's webinar. Thank you very much for sticking around till the end. And like I mentioned in the beginning, there's going to be a surprise for you, which is actually a very interesting interview I did a couple of weeks ago with one of our users. She is an interior designer and she used ARCHLine since 2017, I think, and she's making amazing stuff. So be sure to stick till the end and check out what she has to say about ARCHLine. Once again, I thank you for your attention and see you tomorrow at 11. Bye-bye. Hello and welcome, my name is Untitled, and over here I have a special guest, one of our interior designer clients, Barbie Hajdu, and I'm going to ask her about what she does.
Hi everybody, I'm working as an interior designer since 2017. I finished the school that time, and since that I actively work in the field.
And what kind of projects you have usually?
Usually I have flats and houses. Sometimes I have also offices or shops. This flat is for a young woman. It's in the center of Budapest. It's also in a very it's a very nice classic building. The flat itself around 55 square meters, and it has a really nice height of 4.1 meter.
What was the biggest challenge when you were working on this project?
The biggest challenge was that I had to rearrange the space and make one bigger kitchen with dining room and living room, and also I had to respect the style of the building, so I wanted to align the interior part with the exterior styles.
And how did ARCHLine help you with this particular project?
It helped me a lot with showing to my client how this rearrangement will look like, and also as in the bedroom I designed a gallery. Yes. I could show to my customer how this gallery will look like.
And one of these new things is ARCHLine.XP Live. Have you seen it? What do you think?
Yes, I've seen it. It's super cool, and I can't wait to use it.
What are you going to use it for?
I would like to use it for whole buildings, and not just from an interior part, but also the exterior part. To make a whole project, to provide to the customer a complex designing project. The best part is usually the end, when it's all done and everybody can see that, wow, it will be amazing, and also when I can see that it's done and I can...
And the clients are satisfied.
Yes, and they're satisfied.
Tell us where your clients can find you.
They can find me on Instagram with Lagom Home Studio. Also, we are present on Facebook, and they can visit our website www.lagomhome.studio.